Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for invitation to this conference and for the opportunity to share some thoughts regarding the Czechs in the First World War from the perspective of the centenary commemorations. The war, which swept over Europe in the summer of 1914 and which soon became known as the World War, placed the Czech society in the multinational Habsburg Empire in situations where serious conflicts of interest became increasingly apparent. If it had been difficult to weave through the labyrinth of conflicting interests of individual nations in the Danubian monarchy at peace, at war, the task of conciliating their opposites and yet retaining their loyalty became almost superhuman. Since the days of the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, the Czech society had sensitively perceived their constitutional deficit and hoped for the deserved settlement. The voices of its political representatives, however, remained long neglected among the competition. Only the total war of 1914-1918, which proved far beyond the power of the monarchy, exposed other perspectives on how to adjust the constitutional existence of the Czech society. At the beginning, the Czech nation, although surprised and perplexed, obediently and humbly in an overwhelming way accepted their lot in the conflict, despite the fact that either the declared war aims or the course of the war promised no benefits to it in any way. On the contrary, the Czech nation had plenty of reasons not to consider this war to be their own. When the war regime blocked the possibility of achieving satisfactory constitutional adjustments within the Habsburg monarchy, there had already emerged a resistance group that sought an alternative way out of this centuries-old framework. It was the Czechoslovakian one, with Tomáš Kykal at the head. In spite of growing its strength, the concept of this resistance was daring and risky, because it rose and fell with the victory of the Entente. Moreover, it depended on such a victory, entailing the will to fundamentally change the architecture of the Central Europe. As long as Austria-Hungary, gradually in tow of Germany, did not become in the eyes of the Entente statesmen devoid of purpose, for which the state would be worthwhile to keep, any attempt to pursue a separate armistice or peace treaty threatened to destroy the plan for an independent Czechoslovak state. The path of the Czech nation in the common history of the Danubian monarchy ended on 28 October 1918 in a solemnly declared separation, joyfully manifested breakup in the streets of Prague. It happened over the ruins of the Habsburg project, which, throughout the war, lost its meaning and legitimacy in the eyes of the majority of Czech society. However, this was preceded by tens of thousands of personal, internal mental split-ups, truly existential decisions that threatened soldiers with execution and civilians with persecution, at least, if not long-term imprisonment. Habsburg monarchy had no other choice and acted as states usually do to prevent dissolution through their legal and legitimate means. The Czech society often gravitates towards a narrow perception of the First World War as a sole struggle for an independent Czechoslovak state, reducing the complex tangle of haphazard processes and phenomena of war to a sequence of events bringing a planned outcome of renewed statehood. It's just natural that we in the Czech Republic value the positive outcome, the acquired statehood from the conflict over the hundreds of thousands of tragedies and senseless destruction. The famous army of not yet existing state, later called Czechoslovak legions, and their fallen and dead, acquired a clear meaning with the outcome of the renewed statehood. They were the vanguard of the breakup of the breakup with Austria-Hungary, and they became the bringers of new national ideas and traditions in the new state for which they fought. In contrast, Czechs who served in the Austro-Hungarian army and found their death in its ranks have seemingly lacked their social purpose in the new state, as if they had fought in a different war and died in vain. With the Czechs having served on both sides of the fronts, the nation had to overcome this sort of partition after the First World War and endure various disputes over credits on the new Czechoslovak state. Remnants of this societal split are still perceptible in the centenary commemoration of the Czech Republic. The past had seen attempts by which these soldiers, former Austro-Hungarian soldiers, sought recognition for their part in the creation of independent Czechoslovakia. Their service at the front with the Imperial Royal Army prolonged the war and thus provided resistance leaders time to convince Entente statesmen that Austria-Hungary, having been completely dependent on Germany, was neither worth negotiating with nor keeping. Was this perhaps too bold a design? What is certain that the Czechoslovak Legion, counting nearly 1,000 soldiers, could not get along without the Czech prisoners of war, former members of the Austro-Hungarian army. These eventually made up 3/4 of the Czechoslovak Legion's rank and file. Without the major contribution of these soldiers of the former monarchy, the fledgling independent Czechoslovakia would not have been able to enforce its territorial claims in the post-armistice chaos in the last months of 1918 and the first half of 1919. Responsibly commemorating the centenary of such a fundamental conflict of the Czech history requires that these fallen, dead or missing soldiers not only find a meaningful place in family histories, memories, which they gradually do, but also in the collective memory and in the inclusion of memorial commands dedicated to them in official state centenary ceremonies. This unflattering debt from the past, which we still bear in respect of them, is, for example, demonstrated by the official records of the fallen, dead and missing soldiers. Can there ever be a simpler way the state can pay tribute to the victims from among its inhabitants than to register them on the casualty lists? The fact that other successor states of the former Austro-Hungarian Empire are not doing much better should not be consolation. While every single dead soldier of the Czechoslovak Legion is recorded, 5,405 is the total number of them, accurate counts of war losses on the lives of Czech soldiers serving in the Austro-Hungarian army are unknown, and to achieve credible, albeit approximate results will be methodologically challenging and time-consuming. The closest reliable statistical data for the Czech lands registered 288,000 fallen or dead soldiers, both Czechs and Germans, by the end of 1917. To make it even more complicated, it's not known to what extent the number has grown by the end of the war, when many soldiers died during the dramatic, nearly apocalyptic return from unleashed fronts and from captivity. In general discussions on Czech fate during the First World War, the two figures, legionaries versus the others, are often set against each other. They are compared and their significance superficially evaluated instead of the more appropriate action to put these figures side by side as a symbol of casualties suffered by the Czech nation facing a tough dilemma. A conflict of loyalties of the individual to the state on one hand and to the nation on the other. The war led the Czech society to a crossroads when the men were to choose between two principal attitudes towards the state power. Either fulfill the duty of a citizen or, as legionaries argued, use an ancient right to revolt, resist against the sovereign, provided he does not fulfill the social contract, harm the welfare of the country, and threaten its existence with his decisions. Some fulfilled their civic duty to the state in which they worked and lived with their families. The others left this social contract, risking capital punishment by fighting against the establishment for the survival of the nation and preparing an alternative of an independent state. A military oath is widely and purposely mentioned in connection with the resistance. In Habsburg monarchy, the oath had a canonical character and was directed to the emperor. So when considering its problems, we find ourselves in canon law, military criminal law, philosophy, ethics as well. We find that the oath through which the soldiers commit to obeying the state or sovereign may, in the light of skillful arguments, become a very relative tool. Although the state knows how to enforce it according to its wishes, or to punish its violation as a high treason. The oath only has as much weight and force as it is subjectively attributed by its givers. A forced oath with which oath keeper does not agree ceases to hold. In particularly edgy interpretation, where the oath embodies a type of mutual social contract entered into before God, I shall have the right to break my allegiance when I consider the other party's actions as a betrayal on me and, by extension, on my nation. Many circumstances determined which of the paths a soldier would follow, and he himself could influence only a few of them. Against this backdrop of truly existential choice, a step into the unknown, we find a tangle of individual motivations, noble or base, liabilities, risks, values and variables, of which everyone who ever had the opportunity to find himself in the situation had to consider the consequences responsibly. And so often worries about the fate of destitute families in the hinterland, reliant on alimentation aid from the state, fear of losing the property, led the steps of responsible fathers, sons and husbands away from fighting for the interests of the nation on the path of understandable, simple human survival. If legionary stories tell us a story about civic courage and determination, about principled resistance and civil disobedience against perceived arbitrariness of power, the memorials with the names of our fallen and dead ancestors in the Austro-Hungarian army strengthen our awareness of the responsibility towards laws and imposed obligations in our society. The fallen of the First World War, whether legionaries or otherwise, often share with an eloquent message a common place on the monuments scattered all over the Czech Republic. Like those who survived and returned to the newly established state, shared the fate of its common building. In the next war, then many died side by side for Czechoslovakia. Thank you for your attention.